failed. It would have been the EU's biggest trade deal, but the region of Wallonia, the French-speaking part of Belgium, refused to sign up to it. In Iraq, Islamic State suicide bombers launch a surprise attack on Kirkuk. The city is now under curfew. The lost generation remembered 50 years ago today. A primary school was engulfed by a coal waste, killing 116 children in Wales. Also coming up in World News Today,
all the world is waiting for you.
Wonder Woman's new turn. She is to become a UN ambassador for women, but not everyone is happy. And the pride of the Russian Navy sails down the English Channel on their way to Syria. The British say they are watching them every step of the way. Hello and welcome to the programme. Canada's top negotiator has walked out of talks with the EU over a trade deal. The deal is called CETA, and negotiations between Canada and the EU began 7 years ago. But the deal now looks set to be doomed. Why? Because the Belgian region of Wallonia, you can see it there, is not happy and has blocked it. It is important to say that Belgium is the only country out of the EU bloc of 28 against the deal. While the region of Wallonia has a population of 3.6 million people, and it is French-speaking. The regional parliament says CETA is a threat to farmers and small businesses. They fear increased competition from North American multinationals will destroy livelihoods. Well, this has come as a blow to the Canadians, and the country's trade minister wasn't afraid to express her frustration when she spoke to reporters earlier.
It seems evident to me and to Canada that the European Union is now not capable of having an international accord, even with a country that has values as European as Canada, and also with a country that is as nice and as patient as Canada.
Well, let's get more on this from our business correspondent, Samira Hussein, who joins me now from New York. Samira, tell us why this deal was so significant.
I mean, it's significant for some of the reasons that you outlined, Alpa. Of course, this has been in negotiations for 7 years, and this was really the end of it. This is really, what they would say. They were just putting the bow and the finishing touches. In fact, Canada's Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, is due to go to Brussels next week to sign the deal. So it seems that it was almost there, and now it seems that it's not. But it's also significant for other possible trade deals. Now, the United States is looking to negotiate a trade deal with the European Union. Now, if this trade deal with Canada ends up falling apart, well, then it also puts a potential trade deal between the United States and the European Union in jeopardy. And it comes at a very interesting time here in the United States. Anti-trade rhetoric has grown quite significantly, especially in this heated U.S. presidential campaign. There is a lot of talk of trade deals and the kind of negative impact it has had on some parts of the United States. So to be negotiating a new trade deal in this kind of era, it's probably not ideal.
Samira Hussein from New York, thank you very much for that. Well, meanwhile, the other major topic of discussion at this summit in Brussels was Britain's departure from the EU. The British Prime Minister Theresa May, here she is, said she is optimistic she can get a deal that is right for the UK. Well, my colleague Ros Atkins is in Brussels. He explains just how much people are talking about Brexit.
Of course, there's Brexit. We knew this wasn't on the agenda formally. Theresa May was due to give a briefing to the other 27 leaders. She did that. It lasted 5 minutes, and I interviewed a number of the other leaders this morning. They all said it was as they expected. She confirmed that Britain intends to exit the European Union and it intends to trigger Article 50 by the end of March. But really, this was never about policy detail. It was about tone and about developing relationships. This was the UK Prime Minister Theresa May's first EU summit, and it was invaluable time that she got meeting the other 27 leaders and starting to develop those relationships which will be crucial when the Brexit negotiations carry on. And speaking to those leaders, who met her for dinner last night, they all emphasised how they want a good working relationship. They want the process of Brexit to be as smooth as possible and to serve the interests of the EU and the UK. So far so good in those relationships, but of course they will be put under huge pressure once the negotiations begin.
Ros Atkins there. Well, the other issue under discussion was Syria. British Prime Minister has insisted the EU has a robust stance, particularly over the actions of Russia. Here's what the German Chancellor had to say about it.
We have laid all the groundwork because we have said not only that we could imagine measures against Syria, but also measures against all who are allied with Syria in this regard. This also applies to Russia.
I want to bring you some breaking news now, and it concerns London City Airport. The entire terminal building has had to be evacuated after several passengers were taken ill. All flights were suspended and some arrivals were diverted. One passenger said he was told by a staff member that an alarm was triggered after reports a substance had been causing people to cough on the escalators leading up to security. The London Ambulance Service say they are treating 26 people for breathing difficulties. 2 have been taken to hospital. Let's go to Iraq now in the fight to retake the city of Mosul from the so-called Islamic State. Government troops backed by Kurdish forces are inching forward, with Iraqi troops pushing in from the south and Kurdish fighters from the east. But today, IS militants struck back, launching an attack in Kirkuk, about 200 kilometres southeast of Mosul. Our Middle East correspondent Orla Guerin sent this report from just north of Mosul.
Savouring freedom. Civilians brought to safety by Kurdish fighters. Victory, they say. They escaped the tyranny of so-called Islamic State and the dangers of coalition airstrikes. IS targets north of Mosul being pounded again today, but they hit back hard. This was the scene in the city of Kirkuk. Security forces battling to regain control after a daring and deadly attack by IS. They hit multiple targets in and around the oil-rich city, which is 100 miles from Mosul and had been considered secure. Troops hunting for the militants who proved they can still strike and far from their stronghold. Back at the front line, bomb disposal experts arrive to check for silent killers. They've already cleared 300 landmines along a stretch of 3 miles.
Well, troops are getting into position now for mine clearance. This is absolutely crucial for the Peshmerga to be able to proceed. The mines are slowing progress and they're claiming lives, but the work has to be done with care. Islamic State has laid mines in this area like a carpet.
Then a lone vehicle sped towards us. There were fears it was a suicide bomber. Fortunately, a false alarm. Nearby, civilians who had just fled, now safe from IS, but being screened by Kurdish intelligence. They're trying to prevent militants escaping among the displaced. Faris tells us they were forced to grow beards, and if IS caught someone with a phone, they were beheaded.
How did you manage to get away? How did you...
He's rushed away before he can say more. A new camp is now being raised here for the many others who are expected to seek refuge from Iraq's latest war. Orla Guerin, BBC News, north of Mosul.
Now, it was one of the worst disasters in modern British history. Exactly 50 years ago today, 116 children and 28 adults were killed in the Welsh village of Aberfan. It happened after an avalanche of coal waste slid down a hillside on a village school and homes below. Events have been held to mark the anniversary of the disaster. Our correspondent, Sian Lloyd, has spent the day in Aberfan and sent this report.
Early morning in Aberfan, and a community coming together to remember the disaster 50 years ago. The site of Pantglas School is now a memorial garden. At 9:15, the moment classrooms were engulfed, silence fell. And at the cemetery, high on the hillside. Church bells broke the silence. This was a time to remember the 144 people who died in a man-made disaster when liquefied coal waste slid down the mountainside. 8-year-old Gerald Kirwan was in the second-year juniors. He was one of the lucky ones, but his memories are still very raw.
Could you hear like a rumbling, like a thunder, like a jet aeroplane? Hell of a noise, didn't know what it was. And we like looked up to the window and you could see like a black mass come into the window. I'd been pushed across the classroom against the back wall. The muck was up to my chest. We were just waiting, wondering what had happened to cause the devastation that we were trapped in.
Where classrooms had once stood, today the Prince of Wales planted a tree, a tribute to the lost generation.
No one should have to bear the losses you suffered, but no one could have borne those losses with greater strength or greater courage.
A balloon for each of the victims, and a moment for Gerald Kirwan to share with his granddaughter after keeping his emotions bottled up for half a century.
We never ever spoke about it to my mother and father, my brothers, nobody. Even the children, there was only a few of us in that second year who survived. It was like our little dirty secret.
But it had been a disaster that was waiting to happen. Coal waste had been dumped in huge tips on top of streams and natural springs on Merthyr Mountain. Local people were joined by miners in the search for survivors, but as the hours passed, rescuers realised that the children they were now finding had all died. Many were looking for their own sons and daughters. David Goldsworthy lost his 10-year-old brother Richard that day. This is the first time he's returned to Aberfan on the anniversary itself from Canada, where he emigrated more than 40 years ago.
Daredevil. Loved dinosaurs. Would have been 60 this year in August. And the fact that I'd like to have had a brother.
No one was ever prosecuted for the lives that were lost, although the National Coal Board was found to be to blame.
I can go back to that class in seconds. If I close my eyes, I'm there. And I don't imagine that will ever go away.
Sian Lloyd reporting on ceremonies marking the Aberfan disaster 50 years ago today. Now, a flotilla of Russian warships have passed through the English Channel today on its way to Syria. The vessels included the aircraft carrier, the Admiral Kuznetsov. The flotilla, which is being viewed as a show of strength from Moscow, was shadowed all the way by the Royal Navy. Our correspondent Daniel Sanford watched as they passed through the Channel.
Cruising past Dover Harbour, beneath the iconic White Cliffs of Dover and into the English Channel. Russia's only aircraft carrier, the Admiral Kuznetsov, a 30-year-old survivor from the Soviet era. On its decks, the planes that will reinforce the Russian power play in Syria. Also in the flotilla, the battle cruiser Peter the Great. And the Russian ships were man-marked, as the Defence Secretary put it, by the Royal Navy. The Type 45 destroyer HMS Duncan had sailed from Portsmouth to do the defensive duties. The Type 23 frigate HMS Richmond has been tracking the Russians all the way from Norway. As we watched, all the ships were sailing west, straight down the main shipping lane. It's been an extraordinary display of Russian military power just a few miles off the British coast. One Moscow newspaper called it an armada, and its chosen route, straight down the English Channel, is likely to have been chosen deliberately. The warships could have gone round the north coast of Scotland, but this was the route that sent a message.
Well, the deployment itself is clearly directed in the immediate sense towards Syria, but it has a side benefit to the mentality of the present-day leaders of Russia, of showing that they still have a navy of some significance. And the message to this country in particular is probably that their navy is more extensive than ours now.
For 10 years now, Russia's been directing displays of military might at the UK. This was an encounter off the coast of Scotland, filmed by the crew of a Russian bomber as it was challenged by RAF Typhoons. But today's Russian drive-by, on the way to prop up President Assad in Syria, was one of the more dramatic displays, so close that the warships could be clearly seen from the White Cliffs of Dover. Daniel Sanford, BBC News, in the English Channel.
Let's get some other stories for you. The state rail company of Cameroon says a train has derailed between the country's two main cities, Yaoundé and Douala. A BBC reporter says at least 10 people have died. Witnesses say many are injured. Extra coaches had been added to the train because the highway between the two cities was closed due to a collapsed bridge. European space officials have acknowledged a craft sent to Mars crashed when touching down on the surface of the planet 2 days ago. The mission had been designed to usher in a new era in the exploration of Mars. Officials estimate the impact could have happened at a speed greater than 300 kilometers an hour. Thailand and Australia have asked fans attending next month's World Cup qualifying match to refrain from chanting out of respect for the mourning of the Thai king who died. Both teams have also asked fans to wear clothing which is black, white or grey, preferably without any designs. Now, she's a comic book superhero who became a TV star in the 1970s. It was watched by millions here and around the world. But now, in a story twist, the United Nations is making Wonder Woman a UN ambassador for women and girls. It is a decision that has bewildered some and sparked protests too, as Nick Bryant reports from New York.
She can leap from tall buildings. She can also bend steel. But the transformation of Wonder Woman into a UN ambassador for female empowerment has plunged this world body into the kind of storm that would test even her superhuman powers. This is the modern-day face of Wonder Woman, and the actress Lynda Carter, who brought her to life in the television series, was also at the UN today. With a new film about to be launched, UN officials hope the superhero will help reach younger audiences around the world.
So Wonder Woman lives, do not doubt it. She lives in every woman. Wonder Woman helps bring out the inner strength every woman has.
But staff at the UN today mounted a silent protest. Real women deserve a real ambassador, read their signs. There's also real annoyance that the superhero's leather boots might trample on cultural, religious and geopolitical sensibilities.
Hundreds of UN staff have added their names to an online petition complaining, and I quote, that a large-breasted white woman of impossible proportions, scantily clad in a shimmery, thigh-bearing bodysuit with an American motif and knee-high boots is not an appropriate figurehead.
So what's been the reaction outside the UN?
I like what she stands for. I don't really appreciate what she's wearing.
Although Wonder Woman is a great character, I think that we can find someone better to represent women, someone who's not so hypersexualized.
The The UN hoped this collaboration would be a PR coup, but there are many senior figures here who view it as a towering PR disaster. Nick Bryant, BBC News, New York.
Wonder Woman making headlines. A quick update on that breaking story from London City Airport. The fire brigade has said there were no unexpectedly high chemical readings, and latest reports say the airport has been declared safe after hundreds of passengers were evacuated earlier. Now, for years, Steve Etches earned a living as a plumber, but in his spare time, he wandered the coastline of Dorset in southwest England. It's well known for its many fossils, and now Steve's hobby has enabled him to open a museum. Duncan Kennedy reports from Dorset.
From ceramic to Jurassic, Steve Etches is the plumber who became a paleontologist. So, this is where it all began for you?
Yep, this is it. These are the rocks that I've spent my last 35 years looking at.
It all began on this beach in Dorset. You can't stop finding fossils.
No, you can't. Anyone who come along the beach, you'll see fossils all over the place here.
Steve was an apprentice plumber at 16, but was always fascinated by fossils. So he started collecting and collecting and collecting. And here we are in the garage.
Yep.
He amassed 2,500 specimens. So many, he turned his garage into a display.
For the last 22 years it's been in here, but also it's migrated into the dining room as well.
But it wasn't enough, so 4 years ago he set out to establish this, the Steve Etches Museum. It's a unique, world-class collection from the 150-million-year-old Jurassic coastline.
Not many people can say, I've got a museum named after me.
Yeah, but I never asked for that. That was done at a vote when I went to the loo, and I came back and they said, oh, by the way, we're going to call it the Etches Collection. I thought, thanks very much.
And a long way from an apprentice plumber all the way to being in charge and running your own fossil museum.
Plumbing was a job that had to be done to earn money, but now this is the dream come true, really.
It took £5 million of private and heritage lottery money to create.
What do you make of the story, the backstory of Steve the plumber becoming Steve the paleontologist?
That's a remarkable story because what it does is to say that everyone can pursue a dream and pursue a dream in terms even in a scientific way.
Steve may now have swapped air valves for ammonites, but his old habits are not yet extinct. He even helped fix the loo in his new museum. Now a place for science, education and wonderment.
Fascinating. Now, it's a condition associating in Africa with negative misconceptions and superstitions. As a result, many albinos suffer stigma, alienation and even physical abuse. However, one group of youngsters is stepping into the limelight, hoping to be named Kenya's first Mr. and Miss Albino. Deo Yusuf went to meet the models.
A step-by-step guide on the ways of the catwalk. Girls and boys alike, these models are being introduced to the world of glamour.
1, 2, 3.
It is a first for them because they have lived most of their lives hidden in the shadows. Things might be slightly better now, but a few years ago, living with albinism was almost unbearable. And some remember being accepted in society was the hardest part.
When we grew up, it was a bit of hard because like the people there in the rural areas, like most of them had not seen people with albinism. Sometimes they never understood like how does like an African get a white kid or something. But with time, I was inspired by how people view us. We've not been represented in all areas, and some people maybe have this notion like there are things we can't do or stuff, so it's time we step out.
Horror stories of people living with albinism being targeted for ritual sacrifices spread fear amongst the albino community. But now there seems to be some sense of calm. With caution, they are slowly learning to stand tall and be noticed. The Kenya Albinism Society has organized a beauty pageant to mark 10 years since its inception to showcase the strides they have made in fighting for fair treatment.
When you look into the mirror long enough, you'll only see the small thing you want to change. But for Sarah Jones here, a little makeup, a little bit of beauty therapy will give her the courage she needs to walk the streets feeling equal like any other.
In this first of its kind in Africa, Mr. and Miss Albinism Kenya, contenders are being taken through thorough coaching, not only in their looks, but character as well.
We are also doing grooming. We are also doing etiquette and personal attributes. That is how to face people, how to talk to people, how you're in town, you're meeting with people, how you mingle with them, and then when you're in town, how you're supposed to walk. Before they used to believe that, you know, I can never be a model because I'm an albino. So their confidence is we're still working on it, but let me tell you, the response is good. It's perfect.
For a long time, they have had to stick together for support, but now, as more people open up to them, people living with albinism are learning to embrace society, and they might just surprise you with some of their hidden talents.
To borrow, when your brother becomes your enemy, your color becomes the curse word, your tribe is the past word.
Dayo Yusuf, BBC, Nairobi.
Some inspirational youngsters there. That's it from me. Bye-bye for now.